My name is Junior, 68 years old, and recently retired from construction work in Portland. 3 months ago, my wife Eleanor passed away after 45 years of marriage. What happened next shocked me to my core. Her lawyer revealed I was the sole heir to a $48 million fortune I never knew existed. When my son Thomas found out, he demanded I hand it all over. I refused. The look in his eyes that day still haunts me. Little did I know things would get much worse before they got better. Let me know where you are watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you want to hear how I stood my ground against my own flesh and blood. Eleanor and I started our life together with barely 2 nickels to rub together. We met at the Bluebird Diner on 7th Street back in 1977. She was waiting tables to help pay for community college, and I had just landed my first construction job with Donovan Building. I still remember how she laughed when I spilled coffee all over my work pants that first morning. Instead of being embarrassed, I asked her out right then and there. 6 months later, we were married at the courthouse with just her parents and my brother as witnesses. Our first apartment was a tiny 1-bedroom walk-up with leaky pipes and drafty windows, but it was ours. I worked 60-hour weeks while Eleanor finished her associate degree. We counted every penny, clipped coupons, and sometimes had to decide between paying the electric bill or buying groceries. But we were happy, or at least I thought we were. What I didn't realize then was that Eleanor had always been ambitious. While I was breaking my back on construction sites, she started making jewelry at our kitchen table. Simple stuff at first. Beaded necklaces, wire-wrapped earrings, nothing fancy. She would sell them to coworkers or at small craft fairs on weekends. I thought it was cute. A little hobby that brought in extra spending money. When Thomas was born in 1983, our priorities shifted. Eleanor put her jewelry making on hold to care for our son, and I worked even harder to provide for my family. We moved to a small house in a decent neighborhood so Thomas would have a yard to play in and good schools to attend. As a father, I wanted to give my son everything I never had growing up. Maybe that was our first mistake. Even with our modest means, we spoiled Thomas. Eleanor especially couldn't say no to him. New toys, name-brand clothes, the latest video games, whatever Thomas wanted. Somehow Eleanor found a way to get it for him. I sometimes questioned these purchases, wondering how we could afford them on my construction salary. But Eleanor always had an explanation ready. What I didn't know was that when Thomas started school, Eleanor revived her jewelry business. She converted our garage into a studio and began crafting more sophisticated pieces. She opened a small Etsy shop that quickly gained popularity. When I came home exhausted from work, I rarely ventured into her creative space. I was proud she had found something she enjoyed, but I had no idea how successful she was becoming. As Thomas grew into a teenager, his sense of entitlement grew with him. He expected the newest electronics, designer clothes, and eventually, his own car for his 16th birthday. Somehow, Eleanor managed to provide these things while I remained oblivious to our true financial situation. She always said her little business was doing well, but I had no concept of what well actually meant. When Thomas went to college, Eleanor insisted on paying his full tuition to an expensive private university. I was concerned about taking on debt at our age, but she assured me she had it covered. Thomas majored in business, and during those years, he developed expensive tastes. He joined a fraternity, took lavish spring break trips, and drove a car much nicer than anything I had ever owned. Again, Eleanor covered everything. After college, Thomas met Amanda at a charity gala I couldn't attend due to work. Amanda came from money, old money, as they say. Her family owned extensive real estate throughout the Pacific Northwest, and she had never known financial struggle. She looked down her nose at me from the moment we met, though she was always perfectly polite to Eleanor. I suspected she saw my calloused hands and weathered face and deemed me unworthy of her social circle. Despite my reservations about Amanda, I was overjoyed when Thomas and Amanda gave us our grandchildren. Jackson came first, a spirited boy who loved building things with his grandpa. Then came Lily, a quiet, thoughtful child who reminded me so much of Eleanor. Those kids became the light of my life. I would drive across town every weekend just to spend a few hours with them, teaching Jackson carpentry and reading stories to Lily. While my relationship with my grandchildren flourished, I noticed growing tension between Eleanor and Thomas. He would call at odd hours, his voice tense, asking to speak with Eleanor privately. After these calls, she would seem distracted and sometimes upset. When I asked what was wrong, she would wave away my concerns and change the subject. I now know Thomas was constantly asking Eleanor for money, large sums to invest or to expand his business contacts. What business he was actually in remained vague. He had a fancy title at a friend's marketing firm, but seemed to spend more time networking at exclusive clubs than actually working. Then came the diagnosis that changed everything. Eleanor had been losing weight and complaining of back pain, but we both attributed it to age and her hours bent over her jewelry workbench. When she finally went to the doctor, the news was devastating. Pancreatic cancer, already in stage 4. The doctors gave her 6 months at most. Those final months revealed the true character of everyone in our family. I took early retirement to be with Eleanor every day. I drove her to appointments, administered her medications, held her hand through the pain, and tried to make her remaining time as comfortable as possible. Thomas, on the other hand, was conspicuously absent. He would call occasionally and visit maybe once every few weeks, always with some excuse about work obligations or the children's schedules. During her last week, Eleanor became increasingly insistent about speaking with me privately. The hospice nurses would give us time alone, and Eleanor would grasp my hand with surprising strength for someone so diminished by disease. "Junior," she whispered during one of these private moments, "I need you to promise me something." "Anything," I replied, fighting back tears. "Take care of what I built," she said. "Promise me." I agreed without understanding what she meant. I thought she was referring to our family, our home, maybe even her jewelry collection. I had no idea of the true scope of what Eleanor had built over our decades together. No idea at all. 3 weeks after we laid Eleanor to rest in the small cemetery where her parents were buried, I received a call from a law firm I had never heard of, Hayes and Williams. The receptionist explained that Eleanor had left instructions for me to meet with Harold Williams regarding her estate. I was confused, Eleanor, and I had already prepared simple wills years ago with a different attorney. We didn't have much: an old house, my truck, and a modest savings account. What estate was there to discuss? Nevertheless, I put on my one good suit, the same one I had worn to her funeral, and drove downtown to the gleaming office tower, where Hayes and Williams occupied the entire 38th floor. The receptionist, a young woman with immaculate hair and a sympathetic smile, led me to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The polished table was longer than my living room, and the leather chairs cost more than my monthly pension. I felt immediately out of place. Harold Williams was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and tortoiseshell glasses. He greeted me with a firm handshake and genuine condolences for my loss. To my surprise, he mentioned that he had known Eleanor for nearly 20 years as her business attorney. Before I could question this, the door opened again, and Thomas strode in, followed by Amanda. They seemed as surprised to see me as I was to see them. "I was only told this concerned mother's estate," Thomas said stiffly, taking a seat across from me. Mr. Williams cleared his throat. "I asked Junior here because he is the primary beneficiary of Eleanor's will. I asked you both as a courtesy, given your relationship to the deceased." Thomas straightened his Italian silk tie and nodded. Amanda's expression remained neutral, but her eyes darted around the room, taking in the expensive surroundings with approval. Mr. Williams opened an elegant leather portfolio and began reading the legal preamble of Eleanor's will. I half listened, still distracted by his earlier comment about being Eleanor's business attorney. What business required a high-powered lawyer in a downtown skyscraper? My attention snapped back when Mr. Williams said, "And to my beloved husband, Junior, I leave the entirety of my estate, valued at approximately $48 million as of the last accounting." The room began to spin. I gripped the arms of my chair, certain I had misheard. "Excuse me," I interrupted, my voice barely audible. "Did you say 48 million? "That's correct, Mr. Walker," Williams confirmed, looking at me over his glasses. Thomas slammed his hand on the table. "This is absurd. Where would Mother get $48 million? Williams turned a page in his portfolio. Eleanor was the founder and CEO of Ellie Designs, a nationally recognized jewelry brand with boutiques in 14 cities across the country. Additionally, she made several extremely successful early investments in technology companies, including a significant stake in a ride-sharing app before it went public. Her commercial real estate holdings alone are valued at $12 million. I couldn't breathe. Ellie Designs. I had seen those elegant stores in malls and shopping districts, but had never connected them to my Eleanor. How could I not know my own wife owned a business empire? There must be some mistake, I said weakly. Williams slid a sealed envelope across the table. Eleanor anticipated your surprise. She asked me to give you this. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and recognized Eleanor's neat handwriting on the pages inside. My dearest Junior, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've just learned about my financial success. I know this must come as a shock. I never meant to keep secrets from you, but as my business grew, I worried that our lives would change in ways neither of us wanted. You were always happiest with simple things, a home-cooked meal, working with your hands, weekends with the grandkids. I feared wealth would change that, change us. The jewelry business started small, but when a Hollywood actress wore one of my necklaces to an awards show in 1992, everything exploded. Rather than disrupt our life together, I created Ellie Designs as a separate entity. The money kept coming, and with good advisors, it grew beyond anything I could have imagined. I know you'll use this inheritance wisely. Our son has his own path to walk. I've provided for Jackson and Lily's education through separate trusts that will activate when they turn 18. All my love always. Eleanor. I looked up from the letter with tears in my eyes, only to see Thomas's face turning an alarming shade of red. This is outrageous, he exploded. Mother built that business with my help. I gave her marketing advice, introduced her to influential people. That money should be in the family, not all going to Dad who never even knew about it. Mr. Williams remained unflappable. Your mother was very clear about her wishes, Thomas. She established separate trusts for Jackson and Lily that will cover their education and provide a significant nest egg when they reach adulthood. As for you, she was explicit that you are to receive no direct inheritance. Amanda gasped, her perfectly manicured hand flying to her mouth. Thomas looked as though he'd been slapped. She can't do that, he sputtered. I'm her son. I assure you she can, Williams replied. Eleanor was of sound mind when she signed these documents last year. We have video of the signing, witnessed by myself and 2 other attorneys, with a psychological evaluation confirming her mental competence. Thomas turned to me, his expression a mixture of rage and calculation. Dad, you can't possibly manage this kind of money. You need my help. But I wasn't listening anymore. My mind had traveled back to Eleanor's hospital bed, to her frail hand clutching mine, her final request echoing in my ears, take care of what I built. Now I understood. She hadn't been talking about family memories or her jewelry collection. She had built an empire, and somehow she trusted me to preserve it. Mr. Walker, Williams said gently, bringing me back to the present. There's more to discuss about the transition of assets and your new responsibilities as the owner of Ellie Designs. Would you like to continue, or would you prefer to schedule another meeting when you've had time to process this information? Thomas interrupted before I could answer. This isn't over. Mother clearly wasn't thinking straight. We'll contest the will. Williams sighed. You're welcome to try, but Eleanor anticipated that reaction as well. The will is ironclad, and contesting it would only drain resources that could otherwise benefit your children through their trusts. I looked at my son, truly looked at him, and wondered when he had become this person, a stranger seething with entitlement and anger. Thomas, I said quietly, let's talk about this privately. As a family, he scoffed. There's nothing to discuss unless you're ready to do the right thing and share what's rightfully mine. With that, he stormed out of the conference room, Amanda hurrying after him with one last covetous glance at the papers detailing Eleanor's fortune. I sat there, overwhelmed and adrift, as Mr. Williams patiently explained the extent of my inheritance and the responsibilities that came with it. But all I could think about was my Eleanor, the woman I thought I knew completely, and the extraordinary secret life she had led alongside our ordinary one. The conference room felt suffocating after Thomas and Amanda left. Mr. Williams continued explaining trusts, corporate structures, and investment portfolios, but the information washed over me in an incomprehensible wave. After scheduling another meeting for the following week, I gathered Eleanor's letter and the folder of documents Williams had prepared for me to review. The elevator ride down 38 floors stretched into an eternity. When the doors opened in the lobby, Thomas was waiting, leaning against a marble column with his arms crossed. He had dismissed Amanda, sending her home in their luxury SUV while he waited to confront me alone. "We need to talk," he said, falling into step beside me as I headed for the parking garage. I nodded, too emotionally drained to argue. We walked in tense silence through the underground garage until we reached my old Ford pickup, a vehicle Thomas had often suggested I replace with something more suitable. Now I understood what he meant more suitable for a man whose wife was secretly worth millions. As I reached for the door handle, Thomas moved to block me. "Dad, you have to see reason here. That money doesn't belong to you." I sighed heavily. "It belonged to your mother, and she chose to leave it to me. Mother built that business with my help," Thomas insisted, his voice deceptively calm. "I gave her marketing advice. I connected her with the right people. I helped her expand into the luxury market. This was news to me." "You worked with your mother on her business?" A flash of triumph crossed Thomas's face at my ignorance. "Of course I did. For years. She valued my business expertise. She made me a vice president when I graduated from business school." I leaned against the truck, trying to absorb this new information. "She never mentioned any of this to me, because she knew you wouldn't understand," Thomas said, his tone condescending. "You were content to swing a hammer for 40 years while Mother built something extraordinary. She kept you in the dark, because you never supported her ambitions." That stung. Had I really been so oblivious to Eleanor's dreams? "I supported everything your mother wanted to do," I said defensively. Thomas laughed. A cold sound, nothing like the warm chuckle he had as a boy. "Really? Then why didn't you know about any of this? Face it, Dad. You were focused on your simple life, your construction jobs, your weekend football games. Mother needed more, and I was the one who helped her achieve it." I straightened up, finding some steel in my spine. "If you were so involved, why did she leave everything to me?" Thomas's carefully constructed facade cracked. "Because she wasn't thinking clearly at the end. The medications, the pain, she wasn't herself. Mr. Williams said she updated her will last year, long before the heavy medications started." Thomas ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his desperation becoming more evident. "Look, Dad, I need that money. I've made some investments that haven't panned out. I'm in debt, significant debt." "How much?" I asked. He named a figure that made my knees weak. "How could you possibly owe that much?" "The market turned against me," he said vaguely. "Some real estate deals went south. There were margin calls. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I can fix everything if you just sign the company over to me. I know how to run it. You don't." He was right about one thing: I had no idea how to run a jewelry empire. But something about his desperate plea rang false. "I want to help you, son. I do. But I need to honor your mother's wishes. Maybe we can work something out, a loan to cover your debts, a position in the company if you're qualified." Thomas's face darkened. "A loan? A position? I don't need your charity. That company should be mine." "It's not charity. It's family, helping family," I insisted. "But I'm not just going to hand over everything your mother built. She trusted me to take care of it." "You?" Thomas sneered. "A pathetic old man who can't even manage a checking account without Mother's help. You'll run her company into the ground within a year." His words cut deep, partly because I shared the same fears. What did I know about running a business? "I'll get help. Advisors. The current management team. They won't respect you," Thomas said. "They'll see right through you." The construction worker playing businessman in his dead wife's office. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. "This conversation isn't productive. Let's take some time to cool down and talk again tomorrow." Thomas stepped closer, his face inches from mine. "Let me make this very clear. If you don't sign over that money and the company to me, you will never see Jackson and Lily again." The threat hit me like a physical blow. "You wouldn't use your own children like that." "Try me," he said coldly. "Amanda's parents have connections with the best family court lawyers in the state. We'll claim you're mentally incompetent to be around children. A grief-stricken old man with sudden wealth who can't be trusted." I felt sick. "They're my grandchildren. I love them." "Then do the right thing," Thomas said. "The money, the company, all of it." I looked into my son's eyes and saw nothing of the little boy who once sat on my shoulders at the county fair. Nothing of the teenager who asked for my advice about his first crush. Nothing of the young man who had tearfully thanked me at his college graduation. There was only cold calculation and entitlement. "No," I said firmly. "I won't betray Eleanor's trust, but I will help you within reason." Thomas stepped back, his expression hardening into something ugly. "You'll regret this decision, old man. I promise you that." He turned and stalked away, pulling out his phone as he went, already making calls. I stood there beside my truck, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. As I drove home, the home I had shared with Thomas and his family since Eleanor's death, I wondered if I had just lost my son forever. The weight of $48 million suddenly felt like a curse rather than a blessing. Money that I never wanted or needed was destroying what I valued most: family. But deep down, I knew Eleanor had made her choice for a reason. She was always the wisest one between us. I had to trust that she knew what she was doing, even if I couldn't yet understand why. The drive home from the lawyer's office was a blur. My mind raced with everything I had learned about Eleanor, about Thomas, about the fortune that had apparently been flowing around me for years while I remained oblivious. The modest two-story suburban house where I had been staying since Eleanor's death came into view just as the sun was beginning to set. Thomas and Amanda had insisted I move in with them temporarily after the funeral, claiming they wanted to help me through my grief. Now I wondered if they had simply been waiting for the will to be read, expecting to inherit everything. As I turned into the driveway, something seemed off. The garage door was closed, which was unusual when Thomas's car was gone. I pulled up to the curb instead and walked toward the front door. That's when I noticed them, a pile of suitcases, boxes, and garbage bags strewn across the front lawn. Drawing closer, I recognized my clothes, books, and personal belongings spilling out onto the grass. Stunned, I approached the front door and tried my key. It didn't work. The locks had been changed. I rang the doorbell, a sense of dread building in my stomach. After a long moment, Amanda opened the door, her expression coldly composed. "Thomas called," she said without preamble. "We think it's best if you find other accommodations." I stared at her in disbelief. "Amanda, you can't just throw me out. All my things are on the lawn," she finished. "You have until dark to collect them. Anything left will be disposed of." "This is insane," I protested. "At least let me speak to Jackson and Lily. Say goodbye." Something flickered across her face, a moment of hesitation. From somewhere inside the house, I heard Lily's voice. "Is that Grandpa? I want to see Grandpa." Amanda turned her head. "Go to your room, Lily. Grandpa can't visit right now." "But I made him a picture," came the plaintive reply. "Jackson, take your sister upstairs," Amanda called, her voice brooking no argument. "Grandpa," Jackson's voice carried from inside. "Are you taking us fishing this weekend like you promised?" My heart shattered. "Please, Amanda, don't do this to the kids. They don't understand." Her face hardened again. "They'll understand that their grandfather chose money over family. They're better off without a selfish influence like that." "That's not what happened," I said desperately. "Your husband demanded I hand over everything immediately. I offered to help with his debts, to work together." "Save it," she snapped. "Thomas told me everything. How you refuse to acknowledge his contributions to the company. How you're planning to fire the entire executive team and sell off the business for parts." I shook my head in bewilderment. "None of that is true. I only learned about the company today." "Goodbye, Junior," Amanda said firmly. "Don't come back unless you're ready to do right by your son." The door closed in my face. I stood there, stunned, as the first drops of rain began to fall from the darkening sky. Perfect timing. I trudged back to the lawn and began gathering my possessions, trying to protect books and photographs from the increasing downpour. My arthritis, aggravated by decades of construction work, made my fingers stiff and clumsy as I attempted to repack the hastily emptied suitcases. The neighbors' curtains twitched as curious eyes watched my humiliation. Most quickly looked away when I glanced in their direction, but one elderly man from across the street emerged with an umbrella and a determined expression. Walter had been my friend since Thomas and Amanda moved to this neighborhood 5 years ago. We often chatted about gardening and sports while I visited the grandkids. "Need a hand, Junior?" he asked, holding the umbrella over both of us. "Thanks, Walter," I said, embarrassed but grateful. "Bit of a family disagreement." Walter nodded, asking no questions as he helped me gather clothes and personal items scattered by the strengthening wind. Between us, we managed to load everything into the bed of my pickup, securing a tarp over it all to protect against the rain. "You got somewhere to go?" Walter asked as we finished. I hesitated. Until that moment, I hadn't thought about where I would sleep tonight. My house, Eleanor's and mine, had been sold after her death, part of Thomas's insistence that I move in with them for my own good. "I'll figure something out," I said, not wanting to burden my friend. Walter frowned. "You can take our guest room if you need it. Margaret wouldn't mind." I thanked him but declined. I needed to think, to process everything that had happened. After promising to call if I changed my mind, I climbed into my truck and drove to a nearby diner where Eleanor and I used to have breakfast on Saturday mornings. Sitting in a corner booth with a cup of coffee growing cold in front of me, I pulled out my cell phone and called Harold Williams. Despite the evening hour, he answered promptly. I explained my situation, trying to keep the emotion from my voice. "I'm sorry this is happening, Junior," he said, his professional tone softening with genuine concern. "Unfortunately, this kind of family conflict is all too common when significant inheritances are involved. I have nowhere to go," I admitted. Everything happened so fast. There was a pause on the line. "Actually, that's not true. Eleanor maintained a residence in Forest Heights. It's part of your inheritance, a fully staffed estate that she used for business entertaining and as a private retreat." I nearly dropped the phone. A second house, Forest Heights. The exclusive neighborhood was home to tech executives and old money families, not construction workers like me. "The staff has been informed of Eleanor's passing and your inheritance," Williams continued. "They're expecting you whenever you're ready. I can text you the address and gate code." 20 minutes later, I pulled up to a wrought iron gate set into a pristine hedge. A discreet plaque beside the intercom read Ellie's Haven. My hands trembled as I punched in the code Williams had sent me. The gate swung open silently, revealing a winding driveway flanked by towering Douglas firs. The house, no, mansion that came into view as I rounded the final curve took my breath away. A sprawling craftsman-style home of cedar and stone, with warm light glowing from multiple windows. As I parked my mud-splattered truck beside a sculptural water feature, the front door opened, and a woman in her 50s emerged, her posture straight and welcoming. "Mr. Walker," she said warmly, "we've been expecting you. I'm Maria, the housekeeper. Please, come in out of the rain." Dazed, I followed her into a soaring entryway with hand-hewn beams and a chandelier made of what appeared to be Eleanor's signature metalwork. I stood dripping on the slate floor, my few hastily packed belongings clutched in a garbage bag, feeling like an imposter in someone else's home. "Mrs. Walker told us you might come to stay someday," Maria said, taking my wet jacket. "Your room is ready. We can bring in the rest of your things once the rain lets up." "My room?" I repeated stupidly. Maria smiled kindly. "Mrs. Walker always said this was as much your home as hers, even if you didn't know it existed yet. She said when the time came, you would understand." I didn't understand, not yet. But as I followed Maria through the house that had been Eleanor's secret sanctuary, I felt my wife's presence all around me, as if she had prepared this place as a final gift, a safe harbor when I would need it most. That first night at Ellie's Haven passed in a dreamlike haze. Maria showed me to a master suite with a king-sized bed and a wall of windows overlooking a Japanese garden, illuminated by subtle landscape lighting. The bathroom was bigger than our first apartment, with a soaking tub and a shower with more nozzles than I could count. On the bedside table sat a framed photograph of Eleanor and me on our 30th anniversary, dancing at the community center party our friends had thrown for us. I had no recollection of this photo being taken in duplicate. The original still sat on our dresser in the house we had shared for decades. I slept fitfully, overwhelmed by the day's revelations and the unfamiliar surroundings. When I finally emerged from the bedroom the next morning, the smell of coffee and bacon led me to a sun-filled kitchen where a woman in her 40s was expertly flipping pancakes. "Good morning, Mr. Walker," she said cheerfully. "I'm Sarah, the cook. Maria mentioned you like your eggs over easy and your bacon crispy. Is that still correct?" I nodded, bewildered that this stranger knew my breakfast preferences. "Please, call me Junior. Everyone does." Sarah smiled. "Mrs. Walker always called you Junior with such affection. She told us so many stories about you over the years." As I ate breakfast at the kitchen island, still trying to reconcile this luxury with my understanding of our life together, Maria appeared with a tentative smile. "If you're ready, I thought you might like a tour of the house. Mrs. Walker left instructions that we should help you become familiar with everything." Over the next hour, Maria led me through a house that seemed both foreign and strangely familiar. The furniture, while clearly expensive, featured the clean lines and natural materials Eleanor had always favored. The art on the walls included pieces by local artists we had admired together at community exhibitions. There were photographs everywhere: family vacations, holidays, casual moments of our life together displayed proudly alongside images of Eleanor with celebrities, politicians, and business leaders. Mrs. Walker hosted fundraisers and business events here, Maria explained as we entered a great room with vaulted ceilings and a wall of glass overlooking the Cascade Mountains in the distance. But she always said the real treasure was upstairs. She led me to the second floor, where a large room had been set up as a home office. Unlike the rest of the house, which balanced luxury with Eleanor's preference for simplicity, this room was clearly a working space. A large desk dominated one wall, facing the windows with their spectacular view. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with business texts, biographies of successful entrepreneurs, and industry publications. What caught my eye, however, was the collection of framed awards and recognition certificates. Woman Entrepreneur of the Year, Innovator in Sustainable Jewelry Design, Small Business Leadership Award, each one made out to Eleanor Walker or Ellie Designs, an entire life of achievement I had known nothing about. "She never displayed these at our home," I murmured. Maria nodded. "Mrs. Walker was very specific about keeping her two worlds separate. She said her time with you was precious precisely because it wasn't about business or success." As we continued the tour, I met the other staff members. Robert, the gardener, a retired botany professor who maintained the extensive grounds with meticulous care. Frank, the security guard and driver, a former police officer who had worked for Eleanor for a decade. Each of them shared stories about Eleanor that revealed facets of my wife I had never known: her generosity to staff during personal hardships, her insistence on sustainable practices before they were fashionable, her sharp business acumen, tempered by genuine concern for everyone who worked for her. She established college funds for all our children, Sarah told me as she prepared lunch. Not just the full-time staff, but the part-timers too, and the contractors who regularly worked on the property. In a quieter moment, Maria showed me to a room I hadn't noticed during our initial tour, a library filled with books on subjects ranging from philosophy to quantum physics, many with Eleanor's notes in the margins. One shelf held dozens of identical leather-bound journals, dated and arranged chronologically. Mrs. Walker wrote in her journal every evening, Maria explained. She said it helped her process her thoughts and make better decisions. I ran my fingers along the spines, each representing a year of Eleanor's life. Our life together, yet separate. "She never brought these journals home," I said, more to myself than to Maria. "This was her sanctuary," Maria replied gently, "where she could be both Eleanor Walker, your wife, and Ellie Walker, CEO and designer. She said you gave her the strength and stability to build her business, but she didn't want to burden you with the stresses and complications it brought." I pulled out the most recent journal, dated from the previous year. "May I?" "Of course. Mrs. Walker left instructions that you should have access to everything. There's one more thing she wanted you to see, though." Maria led me to Eleanor's office and pointed to an elegant desk with intricate inlaid wood patterns. "There's a locked drawer," Mrs. Walker said when the time was right. "You would need what's inside." I examined the desk but found no obvious drawer with a lock. Maria smiled and pressed a hidden lever beneath the desktop. A small drawer slid open, revealing a brass key. "This opens the cabinet in her private studio," she explained. "Frank can help you. It has a complicated lock." Frank arrived promptly when called, and together we went to a separate building behind the main house, Eleanor's jewelry studio, a light-filled space with workbenches, design tables, and specialized equipment I couldn't identify. The cabinet in question stood against one wall, a heavy antique piece that seemed out of place among the modern tools. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and the doors swung open to reveal shelf after shelf of leather portfolios. Frank helped me lift down the topmost one and open it on a nearby table. Inside were meticulous records, bank statements, emails, transcripts of phone conversations, legal documents, all organized chronologically and labeled in Eleanor's neat handwriting. The first page was a letter addressed to me. "Junior, if you're reading this, then you've discovered the truth about our financial situation and Thomas's involvement in my business. I've kept these records for years, hoping I would never need them, but preparing for the possibility that I might. What you'll find in these portfolios is evidence of Thomas's betrayal, not just of me, but of the company and the people who depend on it for their livelihoods. I wanted to protect you from this ugliness, but if you're reading this letter, then Thomas has likely forced my hand even from beyond the grave. I love our son, but he made choices I cannot condone. Read these records carefully. They will tell you everything you need to know. I'm sorry for the secrets, my love. I hope someday you'll understand why I kept them. Always yours, Eleanor." I looked up at Frank, who nodded solemnly. Mrs. Walker trusted very few people with this information. I helped her gather some of it when things got bad with Mr. Thomas. With a heavy heart, I carried the portfolio back to the library and began to read, piecing together the story Eleanor had kept from me for so long. Outside, the rain continued to fall, mirroring the growing heaviness in my heart as I discovered the true reason Eleanor had left everything to me instead of our son. For 3 days, I barely left the library. Maria brought meals that I barely touched, and Frank checked on me periodically, his concern evident but unspoken. I moved methodically through Eleanor's journals, starting with the most recent and working backward, tracing the history of her business success and her increasingly troubled relationship with our son. The journals from the past 5 years told a disturbing story. Thomas had indeed worked for Eleanor's company after graduating from business school. She had created a vice president position for him, hoping he would learn the business from the ground up and eventually take over. Instead, according to her private reflections, he had treated the job as an entitlement, showing up late, leaving early, and taking credit for other employees' work. Still, Eleanor had persevered, trying different approaches to engage Thomas in the business she hoped he would one day lead. She arranged mentorships with respected industry figures, sent him to executive training programs, even created special projects tailored to his interests. Nothing worked. Then came the entries that broke my heart. About 4 years ago, Eleanor began noticing discrepancies in the company accounts. Small at first, but growing larger over time. The financial controller brought concerns to her attention about unusual transactions approved by Thomas transactions that benefited vendors owned by Thomas's gambling buddies. "I confronted him today," she wrote in an entry dated 3 years ago. "He denied everything at first, then became angry, accusing me of not trusting him. When I showed him the evidence, he broke down and admitted he's been gambling significant amounts. He claims he was using company funds temporarily to cover debts until his investments paid off. He promised to get help, to pay everything back. I want to believe him." The next several months of journals documented Eleanor's attempts to help Thomas, personal loans to clear his gambling debts, arrangements with a therapist specializing in addiction, a structured repayment plan for the company funds he had misappropriated. For a while, it seemed to work. Eleanor's entries became more hopeful. Then everything fell apart. An entry from 2.5 years ago was tear-stained and written in a shaky hand, unlike Eleanor's usual precise script. The auditors found everything. Thomas hasn't been repaying the company as promised. Instead, he's been embezzling even larger amounts, almost $2 million over the past year alone. When confronted with the evidence, he showed no remorse. He said the company was his birthright, that he was simply taking what would eventually be his anyway. He threatened to tell Junior everything if I didn't cover for him. He knows how important it's been to me to keep our world separate, to protect Junior from the stresses of business. I can't let Thomas destroy the life Junior and I have built together, but I also can't allow him to steal from the company that supports hundreds of employees and their families. The next entry described Eleanor's painful decision to fire Thomas, but keep his crimes private. She had covered his embezzlement with her personal funds to protect the company and preserve our family's reputation. She had hoped this would be rock bottom for Thomas, that he would finally seek the help he needed. Instead, according to subsequent entries, Thomas had begun pressuring Eleanor for loans to support his lifestyle and cover his gambling debts. When she refused, he had used his children, our grandchildren, as leverage, threatening to keep them from seeing her unless she paid. The most recent journals documented Eleanor's anguish as she tried to balance her love for her grandchildren with her refusal to enable Thomas's destructive behavior. The portfolios in the locked cabinet contained the evidence backing up everything in the journal's bank records, showing transfers from Eleanor's personal accounts to cover Thomas's embezzlement, emails in which Thomas demanded money in exchange for access to Jackson and Lily, recorded phone conversations, legally obtained, with notation from Eleanor's attorneys, in which Thomas explicitly threatened to keep the children from Eleanor unless she paid his gambling debts. By the time I finished reading, I felt physically ill. The son I had raised, the boy I had taught to ride a bike and build a birdhouse, had stolen from his mother, betrayed her trust, and used his own children as pawns in his extortion. No wonder Eleanor had left everything to me. She knew Thomas would squander her life's work in a matter of months. On the morning of the 4th day, as I sat in the kitchen trying to process everything I had learned, Frank appeared with an urgent expression. "Sir, we have a situation at the gate. Mr. Thomas is there with Mrs. Amanda and 2 police officers. They're demanding entry to the property." I moved to the security monitor Frank indicated. Sure enough, Thomas's luxury SUV was parked outside the gate, and he was gesturing angrily as he spoke to a uniformed officer. Even without audio, I could tell he was working himself into a state. "What is he saying?" I asked. Frank switched on the audio. Thomas's voice filled the kitchen. "My father has broken into my mother's house and is trespassing on private property. He's also taken family heirlooms that legally belong to me. I want him removed and arrested." My heart sank. Of course, Thomas would try something like this. He assumed I was as ignorant of Eleanor's legal arrangements as I had been of her business. "Let them in," I said quietly. Frank looked concerned. "Are you sure, sir? We can call Mr. Williams first." I shook my head. "No. It's time to face this head on. But Frank, could you call someone for me? There's a woman named Sophia Anderson. Eleanor's journals mention her as a longtime business partner. I'd like her to be here if possible." Frank's expression changed to one of recognition. "Miss Anderson is actually in town. She flew in from New York yesterday and called to arrange a meeting with you. She's staying at the Heathman downtown. Call her. Ask her to come immediately if she can." As Frank made the call, I gathered the most relevant journals and evidence portfolios and placed them on the dining room table. Maria appeared at my elbow. "Junior, are you sure about this?" Mrs. Walker was very protective of her privacy. I took a deep breath. "Eleanor isn't here to protect her privacy anymore, Maria, and I need to protect her legacy." 20 minutes later, the security system announced a vehicle approaching the house. I stood in the grand foyer, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. The double doors opened, and Thomas strode in, followed by Amanda and 2 uncomfortable-looking police officers. Thomas halted abruptly when he saw me waiting calmly. He had clearly expected to catch me cowering or attempting to hide. "Officers," he declared, "this man is trespassing on my mother's property. I want him removed immediately." The older of the 2 officers, a sergeant based on his insignia, cleared his throat. "Sir, We're responding to a report of trespassing and theft. Are you Junior Walker? I am, I confirmed. He's stolen family heirlooms, Thomas interjected. Valuable jewelry that belongs to our family. Check his truck. I addressed the officers directly. My late wife, Eleanor Walker, left this property and all her assets to me in her will. Her attorney, Harold Williams of Hayes and Williams downtown, can confirm this. You're welcome to call him. The sergeant glanced at Thomas. You said the property belonged to your mother and that your father was trespassing. Thomas's face flushed. He's lying. My mother would never leave everything to him. He's taking advantage of a clerical error in the will. There's no error, I said calmly. Eleanor left everything to me because she knew you would squander it on gambling debts. Amanda gasped. Thomas's face contorted with fury. That's a vicious lie. Officers, he's clearly delusional. My father has been mentally unstable since my mother's death. I gestured to the dining room. I have evidence that suggests otherwise. Eleanor kept meticulous records. Thomas took a threatening step toward me. What are you talking about? What records? The younger officer placed a restraining hand on Thomas's shoulder. Sir, please remain calm. Thomas shrugged off the hand. This is ridiculous. He's manipulating you. My father is a simple construction worker. He knows nothing about my mother's business or finances. That was true, I acknowledged. Until 3 days ago, when I began reading your mother's journals and examining her private records, I turned to the officers. My son embezzled nearly $2 million from his mother's company. She fired him but kept it quiet, covering his theft with her personal funds to protect him and the company's reputation. Since then, he's been extorting money from her by threatening to keep her grandchildren away unless she paid his gambling debts. Thomas lunged toward me, only to be restrained by both officers. You lying old fool. You have no proof of anything. Eleanor kept everything, I said softly. Bank records, emails, recorded phone conversations. It's all here. Thomas struggled against the officer's grip. He's fabricated evidence. He's trying to steal my inheritance. As if on cue, the front door opened again, and a striking woman in her early 60s entered. Tall and elegant, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a chignon, she carried herself with unmistakable authority. Thomas froze at the sight of her. Sophia, he whispered, the color draining from his face. Hello, Thomas, she replied coolly before turning to me. You must be Junior. I'm Sophia Anderson, Eleanor's business partner and friend for the past 20 years. I'm so sorry for your loss. Thomas recovered quickly. Sophia, thank God you're here. My father is making wild accusations about me, claiming mother left everything to him. You know that can't be right. Sophia placed her designer handbag on a nearby table and fixed Thomas with a penetrating stare. Actually, I know it's exactly right. I was with Eleanor when she updated her will last year. She consulted me as both her friend and the co-CEO of Ellie Designs. But that's not what we discussed, Thomas protested, his composure cracking. You and Mother both agreed I would take over the company eventually. That was the plan, Sophia agreed. Until you embezzled company funds and then tried to blackmail your mother by using your children as pawns. Amanda turned to Thomas, shock evident on her face. What is she talking about? What gambling debts? Thomas ignored her, his attention fixed on Sophia. You can't prove any of that. Sophia opened her handbag and removed a flash drive. Actually, I can. As chief financial officer, I received copies of all the audit reports. I also have the recordings of your phone calls threatening to keep Jackson and Lily away from Eleanor unless she paid you. Your mother may have been protecting you, but I was protecting the company. The officers exchanged glances. The sergeant addressed me. Sir, it sounds like this is a civil matter regarding inheritance. Without a court order, we can't remove you from the property if you're the legal owner. Thomas made one last desperate attempt. He stole jewelry. Valuable pieces from my mother's collection. I sighed. The jewelry is part of the Ellie Designs archive, stored in a secure vault on the property. It belongs to the company, which now belongs to me. The younger officer turned to Thomas. Sir, did you have evidence of specific stolen items when you reported this? Thomas's face contorted with rage as he realized his plan was falling apart. "This isn't over," he snarled. "I'll contest the will. I'll sue all of you. I suggest you leave now," I said quietly, "before I decide to press charges for the embezzlement your mother covered up." The sergeant nodded to his partner, and they began escorting Thomas and Amanda toward the door. Thomas continued to shout threats and accusations, while Amanda had fallen into a stunned silence, looking at her husband as if seeing him for the first time. As they reached the door, Amanda suddenly pulled away from the group and turned back to me. "Junior," she said, her voice shaking, "did you say Thomas has a gambling addiction, and that he stole from the company?" I nodded sadly. "Eleanor's records are very clear." "I'm sorry, Amanda." She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "The children's college funds, our savings, the house mortgage." From the doorway, Thomas shouted, "Don't listen to him. They're all lying." Amanda shook her head slowly, the reality of her situation dawning on her face. Without another word, she turned and walked stiffly out the door, followed by Thomas and the police officers. As the door closed behind them, I collapsed into a nearby chair, the adrenaline draining from my body. Sophia sat beside me, placing a comforting hand on my arm. "Eleanor told me so much about you," she said gently. "She said you were the strongest, kindest man she'd ever known, that everything she built was possible because of the stable, loving home you created together." I looked up, tears burning my eyes. Why didn't she tell me? About the business, about Thomas, about any of it? Sophia smiled sadly. She wanted to, especially in recent years. But the longer the secret went on, the harder it became to reveal. She was afraid you'd feel betrayed or foolish for not noticing. And then when Thomas's problems began, she wanted to protect you from that pain. She was going to tell me everything, I realized aloud, before the cancer diagnosis. That's why she seemed so anxious those last few weeks before she got sick. Sophia nodded. She had it all planned out. A special dinner, a presentation explaining the business, a tour of this house. Then the diagnosis came, and suddenly there wasn't time. Everything happened so fast. I thought of Eleanor in her hospital bed, growing weaker by the day, but still concerned about the future, about protecting what she had built, about protecting me. "What happens now?" I asked. "That's entirely up to you," Sophia replied. "Eleanor left you everything because she trusted your judgment, your basic decency. The company is stable, with good management. You can sell it, maintain ownership, but leave operations to the current team, or become involved yourself. Eleanor believed you would make the right choice." I gazed around the beautiful home that Eleanor had created, thinking of the journals upstairs that chronicled her extraordinary life. I need time to process all this, to understand the company and what Eleanor wanted for its future. "Of course," Sophia said, rising. "I'll be in Portland for the next week. I'd be happy to introduce you to the key people at Ellie Designs, explain the operations, answer any questions you have." As she gathered her things to leave, I had one more question. "Sophia, did Eleanor ever regret it? Keeping her success a secret from me all those years?" Sophia paused, considering. She regretted the secrecy, especially toward the end. But she never regretted the life you built together. She told me once that with you, she could just be Eleanor, not Ellie the CEO or Ellie the designer, just the woman you fell in love with. She treasured that more than all her success. After Sophia left, I returned to the library and pulled down the earliest of Eleanor's journals. Opening to the first page, I began reading about the young woman I had married, discovering her dreams and ambitions as if meeting her again for the first time. The months following the confrontation with Thomas were both the most challenging and transformative of my life. After 68 years of relative simplicity, I found myself navigating a world of corporate boardrooms, investment portfolios, and philanthropic responsibilities. With Sophia's patient guidance, I began to understand the empire Eleanor had built and the legacy she had entrusted to me. I chose not to sell Ellie Designs. After meeting the dedicated team Eleanor had assembled, I realized the company was more than a business. It was a family of sorts, with a culture that reflected Eleanor's values of creativity, integrity, and giving back. Instead, I maintained ownership but appointed Sophia as CEO, with a strong management team handling day-to-day operations. I attended board meetings and learned enough about the business to make informed decisions, but I didn't pretend to have Eleanor's design, vision, or business acumen. Setting boundaries with Thomas proved more difficult. After the confrontation, he disappeared for several weeks, reportedly staying with friends as he avoided both his family and his mounting debts. Amanda filed for legal separation and moved with the children to her parents' home in Seattle. Through her, I learned that Thomas had indeed gambled away their savings and taken out a second mortgage on their house without her knowledge. Despite everything Thomas had done, I couldn't simply abandon him. He was still my son, still Eleanor's son. After consulting with Sophia and Harold Williams, I established a structured support system. I would help Thomas clear his debts and enter a rehabilitation program for his gambling addiction, but I would not give him direct access to funds or a position in the company until he had demonstrated sustained recovery and responsibility. Thomas initially rejected my offer, insisting he didn't have a problem and deserved a significant portion of Eleanor's estate. It wasn't until Amanda began divorce proceedings and filed for full custody of the children that the reality of his situation finally seemed to sink in. On a rainy November evening, nearly 4 months after Eleanor's death, Thomas appeared at the gates of Ellie's Haven. Frank called me from the security office. "Mr. Thomas is here," he said, concern evident in his voice. "He appears to be intoxicated." I sighed. "Let him in, Frank. But stay close by, please." Thomas looked terrible when I met him in the foyer, disheveled, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes. The arrogant, polished businessman had vanished, replaced by a broken man. "I need help," he said simply, his voice cracking. Those 3 words, the hardest for anyone to say, but especially for someone as proud as Thomas, marked the beginning of a long, difficult road to recovery. I arranged for him to enter a treatment facility specializing in gambling addiction, covering the costs but insisting he complete the program before we discussed any future role for him in the family or business. While Thomas was in treatment, I focused on rebuilding my relationship with Jackson and Lily. Amanda, to her credit, recognized the importance of maintaining their connection with me. We arranged weekly visits, sometimes at her parents' home in Seattle, sometimes at Ellie's Haven, when she brought the children to Portland for Thomas's family therapy sessions. Those first visits were awkward. The children had heard conflicting stories and didn't understand the complexities of the situation. Jackson, at 10, was angry and confused, while 8-year-old Lily seemed withdrawn, no longer the bubbly child who had once run to greet me. Gradually, with patience and consistency, we began to rebuild trust. I showed them photo albums and told them stories about their grandmother, stories about her kindness, her creativity, her love for them. I took them to Eleanor's jewelry studio and helped them make simple pieces under Sarah's supervision. Slowly, they began to open up again. Christmas that year was quiet and bittersweet. Thomas was still in treatment, and Amanda chose to spend the holiday with her family in Seattle. I sent gifts for the children, but spent the day alone at Ellie's Haven, surrounded by Eleanor's things but feeling her absence acutely. In January, Amanda surprised me with an unexpected visit, bringing the children to spend a weekend at the estate. As Jackson and Lily explored the grounds with Robert, Amanda and I sat in Eleanor's sunroom, watching them through the windows. "I've filed for divorce," she said quietly. "Thomas's therapists say he's making progress, but I can't risk going back to the way things were." I nodded, understanding her decision even as I grieved for my son. "What will you do?" "My parents are helping me get back on my feet. I'm looking for a job in Portland so the kids can be closer to both you and Thomas once he's stable." I hesitated, then made an offer I had been considering for weeks. Eleanor established educational trusts for Jackson and Lily. There's also a family trust that could help you with housing and living expenses while you get established. No strings attached. Amanda's eyes filled with tears. "After everything that happened, why would you help me?" "You're the mother of my grandchildren," I said simply, "and I think Eleanor would want me to." By March, Thomas had completed his initial treatment program and moved into a halfway house in Portland. He attended Gamblers Anonymous meetings daily and had found a part-time job at a local hardware store. a humble position for a man who once drove a luxury car and wore custom suits, but an important step in his recovery. I invited Thomas, Amanda, and the children to dinner at Ellie's Haven, the first time we had all been together since the confrontation. Maria prepared Eleanor's favorite meal pot roast with root vegetables, the simple comfort food she had loved despite her wealth. The evening was tense at first, with Thomas clearly uncomfortable in the home that could have been his had he made different choices. The children, sensing the adult undercurrents, were quieter than usual. But as the meal progressed, something shifted. Thomas, with visible effort, began asking the children about school and their activities, showing a genuine interest I hadn't seen from him in years. After dinner, while Amanda helped the children select a movie from Eleanor's collection, Thomas asked to speak with me privately. In Eleanor's study, he stood awkwardly, looking at the photographs of our family that lined the shelves. "I've been working on my amends," he said, using the language of recovery. "My sponsor says I need to acknowledge the harm I've done and try to make it right where possible." I waited, giving him space to continue. "I betrayed Mom's trust. I stole from her company. I used my own children as leverage." His voice broke. "I don't expect forgiveness, Dad. What I did was unforgivable. But I want you to know I'm truly sorry. And I'm working every day to become someone different, someone better." For the first time since Eleanor's death, I saw a glimmer of the son I had raised. The boy who had once had a conscience and a kind heart before money and addiction corrupted him. "Recovery is a long road," I said carefully. "But I believe in second chances. Your mother did too." Thomas nodded, wiping away tears. "I don't deserve any part of her legacy. I know that now. But I'd like to find a way to honor her, to make amends somehow." Over the following months, Thomas continued his recovery, maintaining sobriety, attending therapy, and gradually rebuilding relationships with his children. Amanda proceeded with the divorce, but they developed a cordial co-parenting relationship. I provided financial support for both through carefully structured arrangements that promoted responsibility rather than dependence. Meanwhile, I found unexpected purpose in establishing the Eleanor Walker Foundation, dedicated to supporting women entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. Using a portion of the inheritance, we created mentorship programs, business incubators, and educational grants, extending Eleanor's legacy of quiet generosity. I also established a research grant for pancreatic cancer in Eleanor's name, hoping that someday other families might be spared the swift devastation of the disease that took her. Despite my newfound wealth, I chose to live simply. I occupied just one wing of Ellie's Haven, feeling more comfortable in spaces that reminded me of the modest home Eleanor and I had shared for decades. I kept my old truck, continued to wear my familiar clothes, and maintained the routines that had structured my life before the inheritance. The real wealth, I discovered, was in Eleanor's journals, which I continued to read chronologically, learning about her triumphs and struggles, her hopes and fears. Through her words, I came to understand that our marriage had not been built on lies, as I had initially feared, but on a foundation of love that Eleanor had sought to protect from the complications of wealth and status. One evening, nearly a year after Eleanor's passing, I sat on the patio watching the sunset with Jackson and Lily. We had spent the afternoon looking through old photo albums, and the children were full of questions about their grandmother. "Grandpa," Lily asked, leaning against my shoulder, "was Grandma Eleanor really secret rich?" I smiled at her phrasing. "She was successful in business, yes, but she valued other things more than money." "Like what?" Jackson asked, looking up from the model airplane we were building together. I thought about all I had learned over the past year, about Eleanor's life, and about what truly matters in the end. "She valued honesty and hard work," I said. "She valued creativity and kindness. Most of all, she valued the people she loved, your dad, you two, and me." "Do you miss her?" Lily asked, her voice small. "Every day," I admitted. "But I'm grateful for the life we shared, and for the legacy she left behind, not just the business or the money, but the values she lived by. Those are the things that matter most in the end." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me since Eleanor's death. The journey had been painful, the revelations shocking, but I had emerged with a deeper understanding of my wife and a clearer vision of how to honor her memory. The greatest inheritance Eleanor left wasn't the $48 million or the successful business. It was the example she set of living with purpose, integrity, and love. That was the legacy I would strive to uphold, for myself, for our son, and for our grandchildren. What would you do if you discovered a loved one had kept a significant secret from you? Would you feel betrayed, or would you try to understand their reasons? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about family, forgiveness, and finding your way through life's unexpected challenges. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the most valuable inheritances cannot be measured in dollars.